Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us. Of course, let's take you to this discussion now. We are expanding our examination of higher education and the true worth of university degrees. Now, some observers argue that universities are producing more graduates than the job market can accommodate, potentially diminishing the value of certain degrees due to their widespread availability. Now, this phenomenon is observed in fields such as law and is gradually encroaching upon MBA programs. Furthermore, while the Higher Education Department encourages individuals to pursue PhDs, there is a notable proportion of postgraduates who struggle to secure employment despite their qualifications. Is South Africa encountering a situation akin to the oversupply of PhD holders seen in many development economies? Well, we're asking that question and more. And to explore this issue further, we are joined by representatives from various stakeholders, including on our video linked Mamphoku Khuluvhe from the Higher Education Department, Lukhanyo Daweti from the Union of South African Students, Labour Analyst Terry Bell, as well as in studio joining me is SABC News researcher Veli Mthiyane. Thank you so much for that, and of course for our guest. Veli, let's start with you. I mean, I'm just listening to that introduction where we essentially are saying, are we facing a situation in South Africa where there is an oversupply of graduates and, you know, a barrier of entry into the labor market slightly less than what we've seen in the past? I mean, just talk to us about some of the research that you've done in terms of the lay of the land as it relates to the labor force.
Well, firstly, Unati, thank you for the opportunity. I think the first thing to touch on is that there's a skills mismatch. Most of the employers, or should I say 31% of the employers, according to Human Sciences Research Council, when they did a research, they found out that the employers are saying that there's a skills mismatch. That's the reason most of them are not employing some of the graduates. But again, I think the key factor not to ignore here is the issue of the economic growth. We know that for jobs to be created, there has to be growth of the economy. The South African economy has not grown at the level that is sufficient to create more jobs. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's an oversupply of graduates, but I would say that our economy is not growing at a rate and at a pace which can absorb those graduates, not only those graduates that are coming from universities, but also from TVETs and others who are not necessarily having gone to any tertiary institution. So the issue here for me as an economics researcher, I would say that the economic growth that has been dwarfed for quite a long time has got effect in terms of having this number of graduates which have increased because the economy is not growing, the population is growing, and those who are entering higher education, the number is growing. From 94, we're talking to at about 495,000 who could access tertiary institution, to over 1 million who could access tertiary education in 2023. But we are not seeing the economy growing at that rate which it could be able to absorb those who are graduating. So for me, the issue is the skills mismatch, and also the universities. I do not think that the universities have done enough to keep up with the updating of their curricula so that they are able to provide curricula that gives skills to the students, so that when they graduate, they've got students that are labor ready, market ready, that are demanded in the market. All
right, let me bring in the higher education at this point. Thanks for that, Veli. Mamphoku Khuluvhe, let me bring you in here. And in terms of the Higher Education Department, I mean, we've come from a situation where we had less graduates. Now the department has made sure that that improves, and it has significantly. But just listening to what Veli is saying in terms of that mismatch, you know, in terms of the skills, what's your point and your concerns as the Higher Education Department?
Okay, I think maybe let me start by addressing the issue around having an oversupply, because I think that there seems to be a misunderstanding perhaps in terms of what we're trying to achieve or the numbers that are produced. For example, the National Development Plan outlines that the South African higher education sector must produce more than 100 doctoral graduates per million of population per year by 2030. And then based on the findings from our fact sheet titled, "Are we producing enough doctoral graduates in our universities?" it shows that the number of doctoral graduates per million of population in 2021, for example, was 59. And this number has remained stagnant and around 59 since 2018, which is far below the NDP 2030 target to produce more than 100 doctoral graduates per million of population per year by 2030. And again, if we are to achieve the NDP 2030 target of 100 doctoral graduates per million of population per year by 2030, our universities needs to be producing more than 5,000 doctoral graduates per year. However, in 2021, universities produced only 3,500 graduates. And it also worth noting here that the share of postgraduate students enrolled in our public universities has been on a downward trajectory since 2016, decreasing from 16.9% in 2016 to 14.5% in 2021. And it is thus highly unlikely that we will be able to meet the 2030 target. And I'm emphasizing this because I know that this is quite an important indicator. If international investors are to invest in South Africa, they actually also look at our education and training system, particularly the number of those with degrees, the number of those with doctoral degrees in our population. But of course, as the previous speaker has spoken before me, we do really have a challenge of mismatches in South Africa, and we have been conducting quite a number of research to ensure that our universities and our TVET colleges are responsive to what is needed in the labor market. For example, every 2 years, we're producing what we call the list of occupations in high demand, and we share this list with our universities and our TVET colleges to begin to signal to them to say, these are the occupations that are currently in high demand in the labor market, and we need to ensure that we're producing graduates with the field of studies that responds to the demand in the labor market. But from our side, we know that okay.
No, I was saying pause there because I'd like to probe you a little bit more in terms of those numbers as it relates to the PhD, particularly in as far as the National Development Plan is concerned. You know, what does it mean and how does it translate, into this country, particularly in the economy? But let me bring in Lukhanyo Daweti now from the Union of the South African Students. Lukhanyo, I know that you don't have enough time with us, but perhaps your comments in as far as, our conversation is concerned, especially when you see that, given the fact that we have so many graduates in this country and some of them are sitting at home, with very little, employment on the labor front. The issue that we've been discussing over the past couple of weeks now is the issue of doctors, sitting at home and not being able to work. Just your comments on this particular topic.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. I think one thing that we must do, Terry, and accept is the fact that let's accept the failure that we have not managed to plan properly in terms of how our country is going to mature post the hub. The reality of the matter is that, I like what the labor expert is saying around the issues of the mismatch in terms of skills and what the economy needs. On the issue of the oversupply, my concern on the issue of the oversupply, because majority of our graduates are funded by government, which is in charge of the country affairs. Where we get to be concerned the most as a union is that allowing an education system that produces qualifications which does not speak to the country needs or to the industry needs, so to say. I hear Mamphoku is highlighting the issue that as the department issue the high demand areas to institutions, and it's my first time to hear that, by the way. I actually do that because if that's the case, why would the universities continue, to oversubscribe students in public management, humanities and all these things? Qualifications that for sure that when these students are out, they are nowhere to be accommodated, or rather, when they exit, they must now cross and change their qualification, go to PhD, do teaching, others go to. So I'm saying, as the union, Terry, honestly, this is the very relevant conversation that we are raising, because we have been raising it in the past 2 years to say that why is it that we are not looking to where the country is taking the direction towards, so that we are able to say that these are our main priorities as we produce graduates in the higher education.
Lukhanyo, thank you so much for that. I think a lot of important points coming out from your statements, and perhaps Terry Bell, let me bring you into this. Terry Bell is a Labour analyst. I mean, just hearing from what Lukhanyo is saying, the previous speaker, and just perhaps your assessment of, the current employability of South Africa's university graduates, and just looking at what the availabilities are on the market, particularly on the point that Lukhanyo is making in terms of the current skills don't necessarily speak to the industry needs.
Well, the point here is very simple. I mean, there is a gross mismatch. I'm getting a lot of feedback there.
Unfortunately, Terry, we can't seem to be hearing you clearly. I think it's a problem with that line, and we'll see if we can get that, sorted out, Veli. But let me bring you into this, particularly on the question that I've just posed now to Terry Bell. On that, it's a point that you've also made. We've got all of these qualifications that are being offered at tertiary institutions, but do they necessarily speak to what we actually need as, a country? Are they related to what we should actually be seeing?
Our economy is very dynamic, and it needs proper planning. It needs people who are going to be effective in terms of ensuring that the planning of what the country can provide in terms of the skills is what the economy demands for the future. Even right now, we know that there are jobs that would become very much obsolete with the growing adoption of artificial intelligence. So what are policies that government is putting in place? Let me quote something that the IMF has said. They have said that the lower income countries and middle income countries, the uptake or intake of or the adoption of artificial intelligence is not to the level of the developed countries. So we are still going to experience some problems. We are currently experiencing problems, but we're going to experience more problems because our government has not planned how to balance the introduction of artificial intelligence into our economy in terms of some jobs that would become obsolete and what they provide in the higher institutions, because to a certain extent, you find that some faculties, let me just say it, some faculties like humanities, they've got huge intake in terms of students. But if you look in terms of the skills that those students, they leave with when they go into the economy, it's more academic, it's more theoretical, it's nothing that speaks into industries that they demand. Our economy and our industries are very heavy, and they are very heavy in terms of capital, so they need technical skills. They need something like IT, something like data science analysis, but we are not seeing our universities making that more fashionable to adopt. And then we're getting concerned as to whether the tertiary institutions are really providing the qualifications that are really demanded on the job market. For me, that's where I'm looking, where is the value? Government, let me put the figures. Government last year allocated 457 billion rands in terms of education, of which close to 50% of that went to higher education. And you ask yourself, where is the return on investment if we look into how much government is pumping in there, and we have NSFAS that keeps on granting a lot of students funding to study what the economy does not demand. So for me, it's planning, skills mismatch, and government not putting proper policies in place to ensure that the skills provided, they can match the demands of our dynamic economy.
All right, Terry, I think your line is better now. Let's see if we can get you back. Terry, just you were talking about, and agreeing with some of the guests in terms of the mismatch, in terms of what we are seeing at tertiary level to what we're seeing on the market. All right, so we seem to still not have Terry there. Perhaps let's go back to you, Mamphoku. You mentioned several, interesting figures when you were speaking in terms of the number of PhD students, per, I think you said 100 PhDs per million, and that, of course, is undertaken by the National Development Plan. Just talk to us about, what does that mean? And also, which areas of focus are you talking about here? Particularly if you listen to what is being said in terms of, some degrees that are in oversupply, essentially, and not really speaking to what our country currently needs.
Okay, I think in terms of the numbers that I have mentioned, what we are seeing or what we're getting from this finding is that we actually not are producing enough graduates if we are comparing ourselves with other countries. For example, in 2021, we only produced 0.2% of the persons aged 25 to 64 years with a doctoral degree. But when we're looking at countries like India, they're producing around 3.7%, and countries like Germany produce around 1.7%. We really are not producing enough. I think for us, really what is required is to begin to understand really what is causing most people with degrees, be it with degrees, not finding employment. But that again, pardon, there's a noise coming up. I don't know. Am I still audible?
Yeah, Mamphoku, you're still in.
Yes,
but
yes,
can
yes.
you go back to that point? What does it mean, in terms of these National Development Plan timelines or, stats and framework? What does it mean when you say that we need that number of PhD graduates, per 1 million, I think you said, per 1 million in this country, and especially because does our country really need all faculties, or are we talking specifically about certain areas of focus?
Okay, I think the first point I wanted to mention before I get interrupted was the fact that if we look at the unemployment figures, really, for people with a degree, inclusive of those with a doctoral degree, their unemployment rate is quite low, is at around 7.5%, as compared to those, for example, without a matric, which is around 28.7%. But what we are seeing also in the numbers is that there are particular areas where there is quite a number of demand. For example, there's a demand within the health sector as well as within the accounting space. We're seeing more of our graduate, and I think the gentleman from the union mentioned the fact that there are many of our doctors who are unemployed. But when we're looking even within the health profession, there's quite a demand of nurses internationally. And we even beginning to worry to say that are we going to be, and most of those nurses, like countries like UK, looking at getting people from South Africa to fill those gaps in their countries. We are saying that in South Africa, when we're looking at the doctor population ratio, the numbers are still low, but we have a challenge where most of the doctors are not finding employment. And some of the issues really are not the fact that they isn't a demand in the labor market. There are some of the processes, for example, the guy from the union mentioned that government is in charge of employing the nurses. It might be that there are not opportunities within the
So apologies about that. We seem to be losing that line. Lukhanyo, if you're still with us, let me ask you this question. I saw you nodding profusely when Veli was mentioning, artificial intelligence. I mean, how well prepared do you think educational institutions in this country, for careers with AI-infused elements are? And what are your concerns as it relates to that matter? Lukhanyo, can you unmute yourself, please?
I think what we must, sorry for that. I think what we must accept is that the higher education department and the institutions, they operate as if they're in silos. What they do, it does not correspond. Because you tell me that in these universities, there are professors, researchers, and everything. I also believe in the department, well, they are experts in terms of advising the department in terms of the direction that the country is taking. But it can never be that, we are having this conversation 30 years post on our democracy, but we are still failing to have an alignment in terms of understanding the new emerging areas in terms of the industries and how the country should be responding to that. Because it can't be that, the labor expert in the studio, sorry, I forgot his name, is mentioning something that is very important. It can't be that the government is spending so much money on NSFAS, funding graduates which are going to go back and stay at home and not contributing agenda of our country. If I was an AG, to me, that would be a wasteful expenditure, because the reason why we are funding families who are coming from the poor and the working class, they must be contributing in the nation building agenda. So I'm saying, hence I'm saying I'm glad that we're having this conversation and public so, because the whole country is listening and we need to do something about it. The labor expert is quite correct, but again, let's go back to reindustrialization. Our country, we're running away from the factories and everything. So, how are we going to create, if we were to say TVET colleges must be the institutions of choice, how do we then respond to the skills that we're producing there? If we are to say that what we are producing in terms of, when we're speaking about plumbing and everything, how are we ensuring that those industries are fertile for the students that we're producing from the TVET colleges and all that? So I'm saying it's a bigger conversation that we need to have. Otherwise, we're running a risk of collapsing the entire economy by just funding students for getting qualifications without doing anything for our country.
All right, Terry, I believe you're back with us. We're having this conversation. It's not the first time, I think, that we are having a conversation, particularly at the commencement of, a curriculum year. Last week, a lot of students went back to class to start their 2024 academic year. But yet again, we're still talking about the mismatch and misalignment between these critical skills that are needed in the country and what our tertiary institutions are currently, teaching our students. So talk to us then about what you are seeing as a labor expert in terms of that misalignment. Unfortunately, we still don't have a Terry. Mamphoku, I want to come back to you from the higher Department of Education. There's something that you mentioned earlier on, and that's been challenged, but what we are hearing from Lukhanyo, from the union, is that you say that there is a critical list that has been published. We know that it was gazetted. It is a list that contains qualifications that are needed. It's also contains critical skills. It was also a list that you yourselves have compiled. Are institutions aware of this list? We heard a little bit earlier on from the union representing students that they're not aware of some of those needs, but are institutions aware of this list, and is their focus where it needs to be?
Yes, I think all of our institutions are aware.
I'm putting it up. Who's getting pissed off?
No, that woman, the student, she said, I can't, somebody keeps interrupting me. So she's talking and I can hear your voice, talking to somebody there.
All right, I'm not sure what's happening with our lines there, Veli, but a lot of the things that you said actually were supported, but what students are concerned about. I mean, let's go back to what is being said, in terms of that critical list that has been gazetted. Last year, we saw that it was released by the Department of Labour. How important then is it, for us to look at what we are doing as a country in as far as the economy of the country is concerned, and see what institutions are currently focusing on? How important is that alignment between the various stakeholders, and to take into cognizance what the students themselves are saying in terms of what is needed?
It's very concerning to observe the level of poor planning, if I may use the word, because you expect that the Department of Higher Education, together with institutions of higher learning, particularly public institutions, when they craft a list or critical skills list that gets to be published, there has to be an understanding how then do we address that shortage in terms of what the universities are providing. That's one. But number two is the issue that we are looking at to say, if you have obtained that qualification, how is the economy? And is the economy growing at a rate at which the graduates can be absorbed? That's another big, for me, I'll put an emphasis on that, because we have not grown anywhere near what the NDP has suggested we should grow. We are growing at something 0.6%, 1%, whereas we should be growing around about 3 to 5% for us to make any meaningful contribution in terms of job creation. So whereas we are saying that the graduates, they are more, but they are also unemployed, and the higher institutions are not producing graduates that are industry ready. But we must also look into, is our economy expanding enough? Is it growing enough to be able to create more jobs? So now, the amount of money that is being spent, I think also it takes us to the industrial policy that the country should have. As I said, how prepared are we as a nation, as a country? Because now the things are changing. We see that we are living in a fourth industrial revolution. But if we are still having tenets in our higher education that are of the second industrial revolution, there will be a mismatch. So we need higher institution that is responsive enough in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, and we're also going to the fifth industrial revolution. So we need proper planning, higher education department, higher institutions of education, and also the labor market and the way the economy grows. So there has to be a proper planning so that what we provide now, we can ensure that in the future it will be the skills that will still be in demand. And we need to ensure that there is proper planning. For me, I feel like there is a poor planning, but there is so much money that is being thrown, particularly if you look at, by the way, most of the students that ends up unemployed are NSFAS recipients. So they are not contributing into the tax and into the economy after so much billions have been spent on them.
Okay. Veli, I'd like you to pause there. I mean, we will continue to get just the final thoughts from our panel in terms of this very important conversation. We are discussing, of course, looking at higher education and the true worth of university degrees. But let's now continue to expand our examination of higher education and the true worth of university degrees. We are going to wrap our discussion with our panelists. I mean, some observers argue that universities are producing more graduates than the job market can actually accommodate, potentially diminishing the value of certain degrees due to their widespread availability. I'm going to ask you, Mamphoku, just to wrap up our discussion. Of course, Mamphoku Khuluvhe is from the Higher Education Department. So as we wrap up our conversation, I mean, some of the issues that have been raised here are speaking painstakingly at the fact that we do need a shake-up in terms of our curriculum at various higher learnings institutions in order for us to then start to close that gap in terms of the mismatch between what we are currently seeing at our universities and what is actually required on the ground in terms of the job market. Just wrap up that discussion for us in terms of how you as the Higher Education Department will make sure that happens.
I think it is important for our education and training institutions to work very closely with industry. And firstly, industry needs to highlight their needs in terms of their labor market. they need to be upfront in terms of what kinds of people do they need in the labor market. And secondly, industry needs to assist us, work closely with us to inform qualifications and curriculum development at our educational institutions. And we also need to ensure that industry expand opportunities for workplace-based learning, particularly for internships. And industry also needs to support research and innovation in growth sectors such as the hydrogen economy, because we know that sectors such as that has the potential to create new opportunities for employment. And we also need to ensure that industry support lecturer development by providing opportunities for lecturers to be exposed to their work environment. But I think to highlight it all, our economy needs to be growing. It doesn't help much if we are focusing more on the education and training system, producing graduates which are required by the labor market, but the economy is not growing enough to absorb all of them. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. Of course, Mamphoku Khuluvhe is from the Higher Education Department. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Veli is still with me. Veli Mthiyane is from the SABC's research team. Veli, you've heard what the Higher Education Department has to say. You heard what the Students' Union had to say in as far as they're concerned in terms of what is happening, at our universities, and not really meeting those needs and not seeing the true value of some of these studies that we are currently seeing at universities. How then do we start to bring back that value back at universities so that it speaks to what is happening in our economy? As an example, whose job really is it?
I couldn't agree more with the higher education spokesperson on this matter. What I would say is that the point that she picked up, which is very important, is that there has to be proactive engagement between the institutions of higher learning and industry stakeholders. But that cannot just happen without any proper planning. There has to be deliberate efforts to ensure that there are meetings that take place to analyze, to plan forward, looking forward, what exactly are the skills that the industry will need going forward, and how can those skills be incorporated into the curriculum of the higher education institutions. And if you look at, there's another point that I would like to bring here, that it is true that in terms of the unemployment, those with university qualifications have got a least number of unemployment. However, in 2022, a survey was conducted of the employed graduates, and it was discovered that 38% of the employed people who are graduates are doing jobs that have got nothing to do with what they learned at the tertiary institutions. Wow. Perhaps the industry is adopting them because of or is employing them because of the critical skills, which is a soft skill, that perhaps they possess, and the ability perhaps to read and write and also analyze some information, but it's not based on the skills that they obtained from the tertiary institutions. Lastly, the point of economic growth. If the economy is not growing at a rate at which most people, whether graduates or not graduate, can find jobs, it is a disaster waiting to happen.
All right, Veli, thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it. Well, there you have it, various views in terms of how we can address just some of the shortfalls that are lacking at institutions of higher learning. Of course, this conversation is very broad, and we'll continue to unpack and see and assess just, the current situation at our institutions of higher learning.